Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And thank you all for weighing in on the last video. Apparently, optimism is not a popular subject in the doomosphere. It's all good. I understand. Some people have optimistic feelings and hopeful thoughts, and others do not. I understand the difference between, optimism as a panacea to reality and optimism in the face of, and optimism taking into account what the reality is, So it's kind of a different, there's a different skew on it, There's blind optimism, and then there's, optimism knowing that, when things are looking really, really grim, you have two choices. You can either, you can lay down, you can wallow in fear and depression, or you can just continue trying to find good things to enjoy and or nurture, while the ship is going down. You can play music while the ship is going down, if you so choose, which is slightly more optimistic, I guess, than running around screaming. But, everybody has their own reactions, and in the spectrum of the human experience, in the spectrum of what one might encounter, given a set of bad facts, there's not really a right or wrong reaction. It just is. If we're trying to actually mitigate or take some kind of action, or the big difference is that if you're optimistic, you might engage in some kind of quality activities. You might be thinking about some kind of action that might make a difference, and it's the difference between deniers and those that believe, that know that climate change is real, not believe. Climate change is not a belief; it's fact. And we get mad at deniers, or people who might be getting in the way of taking some kind of positive action, because of their lack of knowledge. On some level, that's a belief that there might be better actions to take, or that there can be some actions to take. That full-on assault on the environment is not a good idea, even though it may not matter in the end anyways. But interestingly, I got probably the most thumbs down in a while on a given video, and I don't, maybe that's because people are like, hooey on optimism, y'all. I don't know. I'm going to remain optimistic in the face of bad news until I can't. If you don't think my days aren't filled with many moments of depression, fear, anxiety, you wouldn't know that necessarily on the outside. So we're just going to go through some weather happenings, I guess. Looking at what is going on right now. What happened to this? I think I closed something I wanted to read. Sorry. Okay, just quickly, in the U.S., 4 things to know about this week's weather. This is from yesterday. A changing weather pattern will bring a variety of weather conditions across the U.S. as the summer solstice approaches on Thursday. To start the week, an upper level ridge of high pressure will dominate the east with very hot conditions, while the upper level trough or southward dip in the jet stream will be in place over the west. This upper level pattern will slowly shift eastward during the week ahead as a frontal system drops southward through the Midwest and east. Below, we take a closer look at what to know about the weather in the week ahead. The Midwest and Northeast will be baking in heat and humidity to start the week, with temperatures 10 to 25 degrees above average. Highs well into the 90s are expected, with lows only dropping into the 70s. So this is what I heard about the weather conditions, is that the lows were going to be very high. Daily record highs are possible in the Northeast. On Monday, the good news is that cold front will push through much of the Midwest and Northeast by Wednesday, bringing an end to the intense heat. Temperatures will be closer to average for mid-June by midweek, with highs topping out in the 70s and 80s. Rounds of storms are expected along a stalled front. The cold front that will bring relief from the heat to much of the Midwest and Northeast will bring the chance of thunderstorms to portions of the Midwest on Monday and Tuesday. Thunderstorms are also possible in the Northeast on Monday as the front moves through the region. The frontal system will then stall mid to late week from the mid-Atlantic into the mid-Mississippi Valley and the Central Plains. Abundant moisture will be in place along and south of this front. This will result in rounds of showers and thunderstorms from the mid-Atlantic into the Ohio Valley and the Plains. Storms may increase in the plains as the week progresses, as an upper level low in the west slides eastward. Heavy rain in heavy rain in Texas. Another area that will see a wet week is Texas. Tropical moisture associated with a trough or disturbance will surge into Texas and Louisiana early this week. Locally, heavy rainfall is anticipated, especially toward the Gulf Coast. This could result in flash flooding. The good news is the rainfall is good news for the region, as drought conditions have developed and increased recently. Okay, that's enough of that. Weather on the other side of the globe from me. Winter freeze in Australia as bitter cold snap hits East Coast. Temperatures in the Northern Territory dropped as low as minus 3.7 C on Tuesday, the lowest recorded in Central Australia in 2 years. These incredible pictures of icicles were taken in Alice Springs, where residents have been battling sub-zero temperatures. Southern Australia has been gripped by its coldest mornings in 7 years, while Sydney has been hit by a hailstorm and rain. Low cloud density and strong wind chill has led to a high-pressure system developing and forcing temperatures to plummet in the eastern half of the country, with snow falling in parts of New South Wales. Winter begins at the start of June in Australia and finishes at the end of August, but extreme temperatures and conditions are relatively rare. Rainfall is generally quite low, with an average of 14 millimeters in the Northern Territory. The Bureau of Meteorology has issued a severe weather warning for parts of the Hunter, Central Coast, and Sydney. All right, so they're getting extreme cold, extreme heat, weather weirdness, weather weirding. These are all symptoms and signs of what? Climate change. Moving on to another article that quite a few of y'all sent me. Unusually hot spring throws plants and pollinators out of sync in Europe. Butterflies hatched early with the heat, but their flowers haven't opened yet. Bees are under pressure too. You can see the climate change. This is from June 16th. From Inside Climate News, Vienna, Austria. In a patch of scruffy prairie near Vienna, marbled white butterflies hover near clusters of unopened globe thistles. They uncurl their long proboscises to probe the spiky buds. Without success, it'll be a couple more weeks before the flowers open, but some of the butterflies may not survive that long if they don't find something else to eat. 2 months of unusually high spring temperatures in Europe have thrown the ecosystem in this urban wilderness meadow out of whack, says butterfly expert Marian Jaros. The warm temperatures accelerated the hatch of many butterflies and other pollinating species, but the flowers they depend on for nectar are not responding in sync. Here, too, you can see climate change, Jaros said, as a hot, dry wind rustles the tall grass, dried to golden straw a month sooner than usual. Important pollinator species are being affected across Europe, she adds. In a nearby forested wetland area, scientists documented how one of our most beautiful and rare butterflies, the Lucifer, is affected by global warming. Jaros said the research showed that the sharp rise in spring temperatures in Austria makes the butterflies emerge from their cocoon several weeks before their host plants have any nectar or pollen to offer. That's also a problem for the plants that rely on butterflies and other insects for pollination. In some cases, the flowers are opening too far ahead of their pollinators, and others, the pollinators like Jaros butterflies, arrive too early. This year's spring heat is giving scientists a chance to study those complex interactions in real time, said University of East Anglia ecologist Anthony Davey. An alarming 2017 study showing significant insect losses across a big network of protected areas in Germany rang an alarm bell. And scientists have stepped up monitoring loss of nectar and pollen is plausible as a significant factor in the alarming decline of pollinators in Europe. I think it's very likely a factor. These ecosystem changes can happen fast. The challenge is distinguishing between the effects of year-to-year variability and climate change, Davey said. One way of doing that is by looking at long-term trends with very specific examples, like a rare orchid he studies in the United Kingdom. By scouring flower and climate records going back more than 350 years.
Daddy, I'm hungry.
Yes, okay, 1 minute. By scouring flower and climate records going back more than 350 years, the scientists determined that climate change had disrupted the delicately timed sequence of flowering and pollination. By the time many of the orchids are blooming now, the bees aren't as interested. Continuing warming will increase the frequency of years in which this rare orchid suffers complete reproductive failure, the scientists concluded. It's a very specific example of what can happen, Davey said. It indicates the potential for things to go really badly, and things are moving quite fast. Adding to the massive impacts from development, agriculture, and pesticide use, climate change impacts could drive many species towards extinction, he said. New EU proposal aims to protect pollinators. The global warming threat to pollinators was formally recognized by the European Commission in a proposal adopted on June 1st to try to stop the pollinator decline. For some groups of insects, including dragonflies, the Commission's website shows climate change impacts as the biggest threat. The 2017 study from Germany on insect losses hints at the scope of the problem, showing that the number of flying insects had declined 75% over a quarter of a century in the area studied. Its findings lent urgency to the European Commission's Pollinator Protection Project, along with the proposed ban on the pesticide neonicotinoid. The Commission's proposal calls for conservation actions like preserving and restoring natural habitat for pollinators. Large connected patches of habitat can help pollinating insects migrate to areas with better conditions. But if those routes are cut off, local populations could blink out. While a few insect species like monarch butterflies make spectacular long-distance migrations, many others live their entire life cycle within a few square miles. About 80% of all wild plants rely on insect pollinators, and the majority of food crops benefit from them, according to the European Commission report. But 10% of pollinating insects are on the verge of extinction, and a third of all butterfly and bee species are declining. The report states it warns that the loss of pollinators would cost billions of dollars and could threaten food security. It's pretty clear that bumblebees will take a big global warming hit, University of Sussex ecologist Dave Goulson said. Many bumblebee populations are small and stressed already, and their habitat is nearly fragmented. That's going to greatly hamper their ability to shift in response to global warming, Goulson said. We know it's going to get a lot warmer, They are not going to be able to deal with what's coming. Several studies have shown how bumblebee ranges are shrinking from the south, but not expanding to the north, which suggests that they will be squeezed out of many areas, he added. Global projections suggest insects in tropical areas will take the biggest hit because temperatures will start exceeding livable thresholds for some species. U.S. ecosystems are feeling the heat too. In the United States, University of Maryland biologist David Inouye said, starting another summer of field research at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab near Crested Butte, Colorado, where he has tracked the effects of climate change on local ecosystems since 1973. The scientists are documenting year-to-year changes in about 100 species. Drought conditions have prevailed in the Southwest since about 1999, and some of the ecosystem fabric woven together by dynamic biological interactions among species is starting to fray. Just like the recent European studies, research from the Rocky Mountain Lab also shows the global species warming is disrupting the timing of some key plant and pollinator species. Last winter was brutally dry in the West Elk Mountains of Colorado, and Inouye said he can already see the effects from the deck of the research station cabin. There are fewer wildflowers and more hummingbirds are using the feeders because there's less food for them in the fields and forest glades. When we have a very early snowmelt, it means the plants start growing early, and that means that there aren't as many flowers for pollinators, Inouye said. Frequently in recent years, early snowmelt has been followed by late frost, which then freezes the flowers. Other plant species fail to grow and bloom if there's not enough winter moisture. As we're seeing more extremes in the weather, like droughts in the West, these declines in flowers that affect pollinators will become more common, he said. Climate change overlays everything. It's not far-fetched to think that the regionally documented breakdowns of pollinator-plant relationships could coalesce into a national pollinator emergency for the U.S., putting at risk $3 billion worth of pollination services, said Scott Black, executive director of the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, a science-based advocacy group. Climate change is the big monster that's overlaying everything. It's integrated into everything else, he said. You can't talk about conservation without talking about the future. And climate change is going to affect suitable habitat, disease spread, and invasive species. Avoiding the global warming train wreck for pollinators requires making sure there is enough connected habitat enabling insect populations to migrate with climate change, Black said. That could include assisted migration with a series of way stations as are being created for monarch butterflies, he added. The Xerces Society is working with landowners in California's agriculturally vital San Joaquin Valley to plant 20 miles of hedgerows with a variety of native vegetation to help connect habitat across the big tracts of the Central Valley landscape. In a chapter of a recent book on climate change and pollinators, he points out that there will be insect winners and losers. For example, some species will benefit from global warming, like native tree-killing beetles are thriving in North America's warmer climate. Many insects can adapt to a different food source if one particular plant is not available, and plants can adapt to new pollinators, he said. But at some point, even redundant systems become so simplified that they crack and start to break down. We haven't reached that tipping point, he said, but we're heading toward it. And don't forget that the rate of change is also very present, and this is a large problem. I wanted to read something else, and I don't know if I have. Shoot. Lastly, we're going to go to this article from Dar Jamel from Truth Out. This is from yesterday, June 18th. May 2018 broke thousands of temperature records across the U.S. A recent climbing trip up Mount Olympus in Olympic National Park brought the bittersweet experience I've become all too familiar with as someone who spends much of his free time on glaciers. On the one hand, the experience of being on ice that is thousands of years old and often hundreds, if not thousands of feet thick, is humbling. The accompanying awe of this reality, coupled with the sheer beauty of these landscapes carved by and now covered with glaciers, is not to be missed. Returning from the summit after descending to the lower Blue Glacier, one of the largest glaciers in Olympic National Park, My friends and I were struck by how much of this glacier had melted off. The stark gray lateral moraine, accumulations of dirt and rocks that have fallen onto the surface of the glacier or have been pushed along by the glacier as it moves, which we had descended to reach the climbing route that morning, stood before us. That morning, we had noted how much of the glacier had melted from the high point of the moraine before we dropped down onto the glacier to rope up for the climb. Perhaps now, because we had to ascend the moraine, its height really hit home. Witnessing these dramatic impacts from anthropogenic climate disruption firsthand always feels like a gut punch to me. My climbing partners and I shook our heads at the spectacle, then carried on to the edge of the glacier in order to unrope and ascend the moraine. Olympic National Park alone has lost 82 glaciers since just 1984. The Olympic Mountains have 4 big valley glaciers with glaciers extending down into their lower slopes, but when the park first inventoried its glaciers back in 1958, there were twice as many. The winter of 2015 was the lowest snowpack on record for the Olympics. In the aftermath of that winter, Bill Backus, an Olympic National Park field scientist and glacier expert, told Washington's National Park Fund blog, "What we saw on our glaciers in 2015 will probably reflect our future conditions." Before and after photos of glaciers in Olympic National Park starkly illustrate how much ice the park is losing. Once back atop the lateral moraine on our way back down to our camp, the shrinking blue glacier, now far below us, felt far smaller as the scope of its melting became all too clear with our new perspective. And this is not only happening in the Olympics, the cryosphere is melting apace globally. In the Arctic, the sea ice hit a record low this year for ice older than 5 years. And scientists say the summers will be ice-free in the Arctic Ocean in the future. The only question is when. The last 4 years have been the 4 lowest on record for the maximum winter sea ice extent, and clearly this trend will continue. Things are not any better in the Antarctic, where new research found that parts of the Larsen Sea ice shelf are actually melting during the depths of winter when temperatures stay well below freezing. This is due to the fact that the foehn winds are bringing warmer temperatures, and between 2015 and 2017 caused around 23% of the annual surface melt of the ice shelf to occur during the winter months. Another discovery from Antarctica has shown that ACD is likely happening even faster than we know. A group of scientists found that Antarctica's southern ocean is most likely not absorbing as much carbon dioxide as previously believed, which means more is remaining in the atmosphere, which of course amplifies ACD. Equally disconcerting is the fact that the Atlantification and Pacification of the Arctic has begun as warmer waters from other oceans are streaming into the increasingly ice-free Arctic Ocean, bringing new species and signaling what is likely the upending of the incredibly sensitive polar environment. Meanwhile, extreme weather events continue apace. The island of Kauai witnessed a shocking rain event when one storm brought over 4 feet of rain in just 24 hours. Scientists warn that the event was a sign of the future, although it is now something that is a matter of history. The second 1,000-year flood in just 2 years struck Ellicott City, Maryland, further underscoring the aforementioned warning from scientists. As the 2018 hurricane season is officially underway, scientists have warned of superstorms, with one of them suggesting the creation of a new Category 6 designation for extremely powerful storms, as storms with higher winds and more rainfall are getting so intense. The current warning categories are soon to be outdated. Earth. Disconcertingly, a recently published study showed that CO2 released from dying forests being decimated by tree-killing pests, as in California, which are on the increase as temperatures warm, is equivalent to the emissions from 11 million cars. Rising temperatures bring other problems as well. One study showed that as winters continue to warm, hibernating black bears in the U.S. aren't sleeping. This black bear doesn't sleep either. This means that they require more food and often end up searching for food from humans, which causes obvious problems. The study showed that for every 1 degree Celsius minimum temperature increase, bears hibernate 6 fewer days. According to the study, by 2050, black bears will stay awake between 15 and 39 days longer each year, thus requiring that much more food. Complicating things further, a recently published study showed that ACD is on track to cause a calamitous decline of insects across the world. Climate projections show that insects will lose nearly half their habitat from that alone, not even including human encroachment and other factors. Given that insects are vital to every ecosystem on Earth, their widespread collapse would assuredly cause deep disruption across the planet, including humans' ability to feed ourselves. It is worth remembering that last October, scientists warned of ecological Armageddon when a study found that the number of flying insects in Germany and likely elsewhere had plummeted by 3/4 in the last 27 years alone. A report from last month showed that honeybees may already be dying in larger numbers due to ACD, with beekeepers citing erratic weather patterns as one of the primary reasons. Weather weirding and weather whiplash causing major problems. Beekeepers in the US reported that 40% of their colonies had unexpected deaths during the year that ended March 31. According to a survey released recently, shockingly, this is an increase by 1/3 from the previous year. That's a lot. From a human impact perspective, this obviously ties in with the collapse of insect populations, given the critical role bees play for pollination and human food production. Finally, warmer temperatures are expected to produce more drug-resistant infections along with genetic mutations and increased growth of the infections, according to another recent study. Water, a recently published study of hundreds of species of fish, showed that they are all migrating northwards to cooler water as global oceanic temperatures warm. The migrations due to ACD, I'm probably going to read this article maybe tomorrow. I got quite a few people sending me this article about the fish migration. The migrations due to ACD are larger than what had been expected. One alarming example of this is how Atlantic cod in New England are expected to decline by 90% by 2100, which would crash that centuries-old fishery. On the other side of the US, rockfish in the Pacific Northwest are moving away from the Native American communities that rely upon them and northwards into Alaskan waters. ACD is already threatening salmon and trout species existence in the Pacific Northwest as their river habitat is warming up dramatically. On the other side of the world, a marine heat wave caused a grouper from waters off the coast of Queensland, Australia, to appear all the way in New Zealand, 1,800 miles away. Meanwhile, ocean acidification, the process by which ocean waters become more acidic due to absorbing so much CO2 from the atmosphere, is causing neurological disruption in fish, causing them to have their senses of smell, sight, smell, and sound altered. Back on land, increasingly intense droughts are now the norm across the US Southwest. A recent report showed that even in years with normal precipitation, temperatures are increasing so much that droughts are increasingly hot, doing exceptional damage to plants and trees. Whereas in the past, droughts were normally caused primarily by lack of rainfall, according to climate scientist Jonathan Overpeck, warm temperatures tend to make the droughts more severe because they pull the moisture out of the plants. They pull the moisture out of the rivers and out of soil, and the moisture ends up in the atmosphere instead of where we normally like to have it. In fact, it's already so dry across the Southwest that forests are being closed by the U.S. Forest Service in efforts to prevent wildfires started by errant campfires. Already this year, 2/3 of New Mexico is experiencing extreme drought due to radically low snowpack over last winter, and this is the same story throughout much of the arid region. In Arizona, it is even worse. 74% of that state is already under extreme drought conditions. In Australia, sheep and cattle farmers are being forced to adapt to increasingly dry conditions as rainfall across regions of that country continues to remain far below normal, with this April having been the 8th driest on record at 63% below average. NASA warned recently that water shortages are likely to be the largest environmental challenge of the century. Places like California, Antarctica, Greenland, China, Australia, and the Caspian Sea regions are already experiencing serious declines in their freshwater supplies, and these are among numerous other places around the globe where this is happening and is expected to worsen. On that note, a recent report from New Zealand revealed a shocking decline in glaciers in that country. According to ongoing studies there, a 30% loss of glacial ice has occurred in just the past 40 years. Another recently published study showed the existence of previously unknown massive canyons hidden beneath hundreds of feet of ice in the interior of Antarctica. If climate conditions change in Antarctica, we might expect the ice in these troughs to flow a lot faster towards the sea. Kate Winter, a researcher at the Northumbria University in the UK, lead author on the paper, told the BBC, "That makes them really important, and we simply didn't know they existed before now." On the rising seafront, Tangier Island, a small strip of land off the coast of Virginia, which is home to about 600 year-round residents, is expected to be swallowed up by the seas as early as 25 years from now, giving rise to more climate refugees in the U.S. Fire. It has been well known for years that ACD is increasing the frequency, duration, and intensity of wildfires, so it should come as no surprise that 2018 is again off to what could be another record-setting wildfire year across the U.S. By June 8th, firefighters across 8 U.S. states were already hard at work on 24 different larger wildfires. 10 of these fires were in Alaska alone. By June 8th, about 1 million, close to 2 million acres had been burned across the country since the beginning of 2018, which already places this year well above the annual average of burned acreage for that date from the previous 10 years. In a 24-hour period, one fire north of Durango, Colorado, nearly doubled in size to almost 17,000 acres, forcing new mandatory evacuation orders affecting nearly 700 homes, as the fire is expected to continue to expand and spread across conditions that the Denver Post described as tinderbox weather conditions. Air. This May was the warmest May ever recorded across the U.S., as at least 8,600 records were tied or broken across the country. In fact, the previous warmest May occurred at the height of the Dust Bowl. For the entire country, that month's temperature was a shocking 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal. This May was also the warmest ever recorded for Norway's Arctic islands, which saw temperatures soaring as high as 6 degrees Celsius above normal. Germany saw its hottest April and May since 1881, which the German Weather Service said was not possible without the impacts of ACD. In Pakistan, temperatures that used to only occur in June and July are now happening in March. The country's weather service warned that the spring heat is driving up water use and demand around the country. Meanwhile, near-surface wind speeds over planetary landmasses have dropped by as much as 25% since just the 1970s, according to climate scientists. Decrease in wind speed means a decrease in evaporation, which will negatively impact irrigation and farming. It also means the dispersal of wind-blown seeds that will be negatively impacted, and city dwellers reliant upon winds to clear up pollution will also suffer the consequences. More recent research also shows that by 2100 at the latest, it is likely already happening. ACD will cause hurricanes and typhoons to be stronger, slower, and far wetter than they are today. Hurricane Ike, for example, which devastated the U.S. Gulf Coast in 2008, would have had 13% stronger winds, moved 17% slower, and been 34% wetter if it had formed later this century, reported Yale 360 on the study. With temperatures 9 degrees Fahrenheit higher than today, the warming expected if greenhouse gas emissions continued unchecked. Denial and reality, as usual, there was too much fodder from the ACD denialists to include in one dispatch. So here are just a few high or lowlights. In early May, the Trump White House quietly canceled funding for a NASA research program that verifies greenhouse gas cuts, agreed to in the Paris Climate Accord, by stitching together satellite images used to produce high-resolution models of Earth's atmospheric carbon flows. Then, after delaying release for months in order to delete all mentions of ACD, the Trump administration finally made public a National Park Service report, of course, with no mention of ACD. If there were a Darwin Award for the most ridiculous ACD denialist, however, it would most certainly go to Alabama Republican Representative Mo Brooks, who in May claimed that sea level rise was not due to ACD, but instead is being caused by rocks tumbling into the ocean. Back to reality, new NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, a longtime ACD denier, recently admitted that humans are the cause of climate disruption. Furthermore, a growing number of Republican voters are acknowledging that climate disruption is human-caused, as a recent poll showed 14% more of them are accepting reality. All right, maybe we are making a dent. Maybe these voices are finally being heard. Perhaps because more of their constituents are waking up, 3 House Republicans recently joined a bipartisan group of lawmakers working to address ACD threats. Thanks to a group of high school students, Utah Governor Gary Herbert recently signed an ACD resolution that the students had championed, which acknowledges the existence of ACD and calls for emission cuts. These reality checks are indeed refreshing, as we must have factually accurate maps to navigate this era of runaway climate disruption in order to prioritize our life decisions wisely. This knowledge is made more urgent by the fact that atmospheric CO2 levels recently broke yet another record, when they exceeded 411 parts per million in May, a month which also had the highest monthly average ever recorded. And that is the end of that article. I hope you enjoyed it. Indeed, we need, massive and radical knowledge sharing, massive and radical political change in this country, if we even have any chance, if there is a chance. Not only does the Trump administration need to go, but all corporate Democrats need to go. All corporate influence, all military industrial influence on our government needs to be wiped away and done away with. This is just the truth. This is partly why I, bring other news stories into my podcast, is to just outline and delineate what it, the forces that are arrayed against the truth are the forces that are keeping everybody in ignorance, are very powerful, and they have many means at their disposal in which to confuse people, distract people, propagandize people, lie to people. This is what we're up against, and we need to get past all of that stuff, all of that media, the media blitz on us to, think about these other issues that are important, but, we need to get past all of that to understand that we are very close to extinction. Not to say that these other issues don't need to be resolved, but they will be resolved if we actually understand, okay, this is not important, right now. We need to, the world needs to align with a much more important quest, a much more important activity, and that activity is aligning ourselves with nature and nurturing nature. So that means, the focus on, trying to prop up business and military governments needs to go away. And we need peace, we need justice, we need harmony, and we need to have all those things in order to concentrate on this problem. That sounds like a whole bunch of optimism and a whole bunch of hopium. I understand that. But I'm just saying that's what needs to happen. If you want to know what needs to happen, that's what needs to happen. If you want to know what that looks like, if we want to reach that goal, we need to think about what that looks like and what the road looks like. And obviously, the first thing that needs to go is the Trump administration, the corporate Democrats and the corporate Republicans. We need scientists and teachers and environmentalists and other, laymen of all sorts to be making these decisions and not politicians and businessmen. They need to go from office if we're even going to have a fighting chance. Politically, that's what needs to happen. So, I urge other people to run for office. I urge you to, if you're into voting, to vote against or vote out politicians and businessmen, and vote in other people who have a much greater vision and not just, these specialized little knob turning little guys. They're not helping us. They're not going to do anything for us. They're just going to keep this machine going. The machine needs to stop. There are many other ways to do this too, but I have gone on very long in this video. Obviously, we could talk about this some more in the comment section. Hope to see you tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace. I also forgot to say thank you always for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. I also forgot to say, if you would like to support this channel, you can do so with the links below. I need your support because I would like to continue doing this work. I would like to continue doing more of this work. And so, all of your support, your comments, your likes, your subscriptions, your, financial support, all of it helps me keep this going. So until next time, peace.